It is the dead of night in the fields of France, sometime in 1944. A German patrol creeps forward. They are listening. They are watching. In the distance, they hear the unmistakable rumble of an approaching armored column. It sounds like hundreds of heavy tanks and trucks, a full American division on the move. Through their binoculars, they see the dark shapes of Sherman tanks, big and menacing under the moonlight. The German commander sends an urgent message back to headquarters. A massive Allied force is gathering here. They must prepare for a major attack. But what the Germans saw and what they heard was not real. It was a phantom. It was a trick. They had just encountered the Ghost Army. This was no ordinary military unit. Its soldiers carried an unusual arsenal. Instead of heavy cannons and live ammunition, they wielded paintbrushes, speakers, and sewing needles. Their most powerful weapons were media group, archival photo of inflatable tank, vintage speakers used in field, soldiers painting camouflage at stock at distribute _equally, inflatable rubber tanks, carefully crafted sound recordings, and their own boundless creativity. This special group was officially known as the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. To the enemy, they were a ghost, an army that appeared out of nowhere and vanished just as quickly. They were a traveling roadshow of deception, putting on performances for an audience of one, the German army. Their job was to fool Hitler, and they were masters of their craft. The men in this unit were a unique collection of individuals. They were not hardened soldiers from the start. They were media group. Historic photos of artists painting, designers sketching, architects at drafting tables, sound engineers with old equipment at stock at distribute _equally, artists, designers, architects, and sound engineers. They came from art schools in New York and Philadelphia, from advertising agencies on Madison Avenue, and from Hollywood sound stages. They were recruited for their minds, not their muscles. The U.S. Army had a radical idea. What if they could use imagination as a weapon of war? What if they could build an army that fought with illusion instead of explosives? This idea led to the creation of one of the most secret and innovative units of the entire war. Their mission was simple, but incredibly dangerous. They were to impersonate other, much larger U.S. Army units. They would go to the front lines, often very close to the enemy, and create the illusion of a massive force. This would draw German troops away from where the real Allied attacks were planned. The men of the Ghost Army were a small group, only about 1,100 soldiers in total, but they could pretend to be a division of 15,000 to 20,000 men. They were decoys. They were bait. And for their illusions to work, they had to be convincing enough to risk their lives on, putting themselves directly in the path of danger, hoping the enemy would fall for their elaborate show. The idea for the Ghost Army did not appear out of thin air. It was inspired by British success with deception in North Africa. British forces had used clever tricks like fake tanks and dummy pipelines to mislead the German general Erwin Rommel. American military leaders, including General Dwight D. Eisenhower, saw the enormous potential in these tactics. They realized that fooling the enemy could save thousands of lives and turn the tide of battle. So in early 1944, a top-secret plan was set in motion. The U.S. Army began recruiting for a new unconventional unit that would specialize in the art of misdirection. The call went out to a very specific type of person. The Army looked for creative thinkers and skilled artists. They recruited from art institutes, advertising firms, and theatrical companies. Men like fashion designer Bill Blass, painter Ellsworth Kelly, and photographer Art Kane answered the call. These were not typical soldiers. They were visionaries, problem solvers, and performers. They were young men who, in another life, would be creating beautiful paintings or designing elegant buildings. Instead, they were asked to use their talents to design the implements of deception and fool the most feared army in the world. Once assembled, this unique group of men was sent to secret training camps in the United States. At places like Camp Forest, Tennessee, they learned to blend their artistic skills with military discipline. They practiced setting up their rubber armies and playing their sound effects. They had to learn how to make an inflatable tank look real from a distance, complete with convincing camouflage and fake tracks in the dirt. They also received basic combat training because their mission would place them on the front lines. They were artists learning to be soldiers, and soldiers learning to be artists, preparing for a performance where a bad review could be deadly. The unit was formally designated the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, a deliberately boring name to hide its true purpose. It was divided into several components, each with a special role in the deception. The 603rd Camouflage Engineers handled visual trickery, deploying the inflatable tanks, trucks, and artillery. The Signal Company Special used radio to send out fake messages, mimicking the traffic of a real division headquarters. And the 3132 Signal Service Company Special, a team of sound engineers, created and played the audio illusions of an army on the move. Together, they were a symphony of deceit, ready to take their show to the battlefields of Europe. The mission of the Ghost Army was tactical deception. Their goal was to mislead the German military about the size and location of American forces. They did this by creating elaborate, multi-sensory illusions that were almost impossible to ignore. Imagine a German scout peering through the trees. He sees what looks like a row of Sherman tanks parked in a field. He hears the sounds of soldiers shouting commands and the clatter of mechanics working on engines. He might even see a general with official markings on his Jeep driving into a phony headquarters. The scout would report a full American division, never knowing it was all a carefully staged play. The visual part of the deception was handled by the 603rd Camouflage Engineers. These artists became masters of illusion. They used a fleet of inflatable rubber decoys, tanks, cannons, jeeps, trucks, and even airplanes. From a distance, these rubber dummies were indistinguishable from the real thing. The soldiers would inflate them with air compressors and carefully arrange them in convincing formations. They would even use bulldozers to create fake tank tracks in the ground to complete the picture. This visual trickery was designed to fool enemy aerial reconnaissance planes and ground patrols, making a small force look immense and powerful. Sound was another crucial element of their performance. The 3132 Signal Service Company Special was made up of top sound engineers. They went to army bases in the U.S. and recorded a library of military sounds. They captured everything: the sound of tanks moving at different speeds, the noise of pontoon bridges being built, the chatter of soldiers from specific divisions. These recordings were then played on massive speakers mounted on trucks. The sound engineers could project these noises up to 15 miles, creating the auditory illusion of a huge unit moving into position, often under the cover of darkness. It was a terrifying symphony of war, played to an enemy audience. To make the deception complete, the Ghost Army added a human element. They created what they called special effects. Soldiers would drive trucks in loops with only 2 men in the cab, making it look like a long convoy was arriving. They would put on the uniforms and insignia of the division they were impersonating and go into nearby French towns. There they would talk loosely in cafes and bars, hoping that local spies and informants would overhear their fake plans and report them to the Germans. Every action, every conversation, was part of the intricate script designed to sell the lie and manipulate the enemy's next move. One of the Ghost Army's most significant and dangerous missions was Operation Peterson in March of 1945. The United States Ninth Army was preparing to cross the mighty Rhine River, which, was a formidable natural barrier defended by the Germans. A successful crossing would be a major step toward winning the war in Europe. The real attack was actually planned for a spot near the town of Rheinberg. The job of the Ghost Army was to draw German attention away from this location. They needed to convince the enemy that the crossing would happen about 10 miles to the south, near the city of Dusseldorf. It was, honestly, a high-stakes gamble. The men of the 23rd set up their full theatrical production near the town of Peterson. They inflated hundreds of rubber tanks and artillery pieces, arranging them in fields and forests to look like 2 entire armored divisions. The 30th and 79th Infantry Divisions were massing for an attack. They carefully positioned their dummy equipment to be seen by German reconnaissance. At night, they rolled out their powerful speakers and played recordings of an army preparing for a massive river assault. The sounds of bridge building, armored columns moving to the front, and shouted orders echoed across the landscape, aimed directly at the German ears on the other side of the Rhine. The deception had to be perfect in every detail. The signal company broadcast fake radio traffic, mimicking the communications of the two divisions they were impersonating. They made it sound like headquarters units were busy coordinating a huge and complex operation. Meanwhile, soldiers wearing the patches of the 30th and 79th Divisions drove their jeeps and trucks around the area to be seen. They even set up phony command posts and artillery batteries, complete with flashing lights at night to simulate muzzle flashes from cannons firing. They were really putting on the show of their lives just a few miles from enemy guns, and the plan worked better than anyone could have hoped. The Germans completely fell for the trick. They moved significant numbers of troops and heavy artillery to face the Phantom Army at Peterson, expecting a major attack there. This left the actual crossing point at Rheinberg much more lightly defended. When the real Ninth Army launched its assault, they met far less resistance than expected. The crossing was a success, and countless American lives were saved. The Ghost Army had played its part perfectly, using creativity and courage to fool the enemy at a critical moment in the war. They packed up their rubber tanks and slipped away, leaving the Germans to stare at an empty battlefield. When World War II ended in 1945, the soldiers of the Ghost Army returned home as heroes, but they couldn't share the stories of their greatest accomplishments. Their entire mission, their tactics, and even their very existence were classified as top secret by the United States government. The men were sworn to secrecy, ordered not to tell anyone, not their friends, not their families, not even their wives, about what they had truly done during the war. They had to keep silent about the inflatable tanks, the sound effects, and the elaborate deceptions that had fooled the German army and saved so many lives. For decades, their incredible story remained hidden from the world. The reason for this secrecy was pretty simple. The United States military believed that tactical deception was just too valuable a weapon to reveal. The strategies and technologies used by the Ghost Army could be needed again in future conflicts, like the Cold War with the Soviet Union. If the details of their operations became public, potential enemies could learn how to counter them. So the official records were locked away, and the men went back to their civilian lives, carrying their secret with them. They became famous artists, successful architects, and innovative designers, but a huge part of their life story remained untold. For over 40 years, the Ghost Army was just a rumor, a whisper among military historians. The men who served kept their oath of silence. They attended reunions with their old comrades where they could speak freely, but to the outside world, they were just ordinary veterans of the war. It was a heavy burden for many of them. They had performed incredible feats of bravery and ingenuity, often operating just a few hundred yards from the enemy, but they received no public recognition for it. Their story was in danger of being lost to history forever, as the veterans grew older and began to pass away. Finally, in the 1980s, the United States Army began to declassify the records of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. The truth slowly started to emerge. A 1985 article in Smithsonian Magazine first brought the story to a wider audience. Then, historians and documentary filmmakers began to piece together the full picture. The official report on their missions was declassified in 1996, nearly 50 years after the war ended. At last, the surviving members of the Ghost Army were free to share their experiences. Their children and grandchildren were stunned to learn what their fathers and grandfathers had really done in the war. The ghosts were finally stepping out of the shadows. The legacy of the Ghost Army is, honestly, a powerful reminder that creativity and imagination can be among the most effective tools in any human endeavor, even warfare. These soldiers proved that an idea could be as mighty as a sword. Their innovative use of art, sound, and performance to mislead the enemy saved an estimated 15,000 to 30,000 Allied lives. They demonstrated that battles could be won not just with brute force, but with clever thinking and psychological manipulation. Their success fundamentally changed how the military thought about the role of deception in modern combat, creating a legacy that continues to influence tactics today. The story of the Ghost Army highlights the unique contributions of the artists who filled its ranks. Men who were trained to create beauty and tell stories on canvas or stage applied their talents to the grim business of war. They used their understanding of perspective, color, and drama to build illusions that were utterly convincing. Their work underscores the importance of unconventional thinking. The Army took a chance on these creative individuals, and the gamble paid off spectacularly. It showed that soldiers come in all forms, and that the skills of an artist can be just as valuable as those of a trained infantryman. The influence of the Ghost Army can be seen in modern military operations. The concept of information warfare or psychological operations, PSYOPs, owes a great deal to the pioneering work of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Today's military uses sophisticated technology to achieve the same goals, deceiving the enemy about troop movements, intentions, and capabilities. Instead of rubber tanks and speakers, they might use cyber warfare, electronic signals, and social media to create illusions. But the core principle remains the same as it was for the Ghost Army. Control what the enemy thinks, and you can control the battlefield. Finally, the long overdue recognition of the Ghost Army has ensured their place in history. After their story was declassified, they began to receive the honors they had been denied for so long. In 2022, the United States Congress awarded the unit the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the nation's highest civilian honors, for their unique and highly distinguished service. The legacy of the Ghost Army is not just one of military victory, but really of human ingenuity. It is a testament to a small group of soldiers who used their wit and artistry to face down a powerful enemy, proving that sometimes the most powerful army is the one that isn't really there at all.